our second speaker, maybe we can put the slides. So the second paper is going to be MirageFlow, a new bandwidth inflation attack on Tor. And the presenter is Christoph Sender.
Yep.
Thank you.
Hello everybody, my name is Christoph Sender, and today I present to you a collaborative work between the University of Würzburg and the University of Texas at San Antonio. Here we will present our attack, the new a novel inflation attack on Tor called MirageFlow. So let's recap. What is the Tor network? As discussed by the previous speaker, it's an anonymization network that allows a client to communicate anonymously with a destination. Now some numbers for this network. They consist of voluntarily run 7,000 relays. It has 300 gigabit per second user traffic and is advertised as 750 gigabit per second throughput potentially throughout the whole network. Daily, around 2 million clients connect through the Tor network. As mentioned also before, the Tor network consists of 3 types of relays. The guard relay, which is the entry point for the traffic from the client, middle relays that only communicate within the Tor network, and the exit relays that actually exit the Tor network. Now, if a client connects to the Tor network, it first needs to select 3 relays. Once it's selected them, the client creates a so-called circuit, so it has a connection between the client and the destination. Now, of course, it would be boring if no attackers were involved here. So I also mentioned before by the speaker, we have so-called flow correlation attacks. That if an attacker has control over the entry and the exit of the client's traffic, the attacker can de-anonymize the client's traffic here. Another point also talked by the previous speaker is website fingerprinting. So if an attacker controls a node in the Tor network, it's potential to check which websites are served to within the Tor network. Now, both of those attacks want to increase the traffic to their malicious nodes, so their attacks become more effective. How do they do this? By employing another attack, a so-called bandwidth inflation attacks. So we have here a client, again, that has a traffic to the destination of the Tor network, and how does the client select those relays within the Tor network? It is based on the capabilities and the bandwidth of each of the nodes, and this bandwidth is measured by Tor by bandwidth authorities, which are creating a 2-hop connection to a file server, download the files, and thereby measuring, here in this case, the middle relay's bandwidth. Now, if an attacker here also has access to this, controls this middle relay, here's an important note from the related work that an adversary can distinguish between regular and measurement traffic. Once the attacker is capable of that, he can drop the client traffic, thereby decreasing the load on the node, and thereby allowing more bandwidth for the bandwidth authority to use for the bandwidth measurements. Here an important factor is the so-called inflation factor, meaning how much bandwidth can be increased by the attacker in this scenario. And our attack aims to strengthen this adversary. So for the major contributions of our work, we present a novel inflation attack against Tor. We check its resilience of existing bandwidth measurements alternative against this new attack, and analyze the Tor for potential usage of our attack primitives. So let's start with our attack strategy and the general idea of our attack. We have here, again, this bandwidth authority that connects to a file server to download and check how much bandwidth an adversarial controlled relay can provide. Now the idea here is that those nodes might actually not be separate nodes, but share a platform and thereby sharing computer resources. And by this sharing, they can also inflate the potential bandwidth that is measured by the bandwidth authority. We call this type C-MirageFlow for co-resident MirageFlow. We can further extend this principle by not only sharing the computational resources of our attack, but also the networking resources. Here we have a transparent node that has more bandwidth than the rest of the nodes in our attack, and can then answer basically the bandwidth request by the bandwidth authority, and thereby increasing and inflating the bandwidth measurements. All of those nodes are, of course, controlled by the adversary. Now, let's dive into a little bit more details. For the C-MirageFlow, we can look at it that clients and bandwidth authorities will contact our co-resident server with Tor traffic, and this server will hold different relays. One is to be measured, and other relays that are co-resident on this server. The traffic classifier here is there to differentiate between the measurement traffic and the client traffic. And once the measurement traffic hits our co-resident server, they can drop, the adversary can drop the user traffic to the other relays, and thereby increasing the bandwidth measured in the scenario. If we go to D-MirageFlow, the decentralized MirageFlow, we have again clients and bandwidth authority creating Tor traffic, but instead of a co-resident server, the input is a router in this case, and behind the router we have again our cluster of relays and one dedicated relay server that has much more bandwidth than the rest of the relays considered in this scenario. Again, here the router is able to differentiate between the measurement traffic and the client traffic, but instead of simply dropping the rest of the user traffic, it can relay this measurement traffic to our dedicated server that then can answer the measurement from the bandwidth authority. We can always include also dropping of user traffic to further increase the inflation and to lessen the load on the router. Now, for the evaluation of the MirageFlow, we asked the safety board of Tor to do it in the real network. However, this request was declined, so we did also use a test network for our setup. And in this test network, we used VMs to simulate everything. So for the C-MirageFlow, we used a co-residing server with 5 relays, and we add consecutively new relays to our server here. We can see here that the inflation increases by the number of relays within our co-resident server, and in a total bandwidth inflation in our test setup, we achieved over 300% inflation. We also used distributed MirageFlow, where we hosted 3 servers with 6 relays each. And in this case, we abstracted the router as an OpenVPN network to actually be able to route the traffic throughout the system. That's why single relays have here less bandwidth than for the C-MirageFlow. Again, here we can see that the total measurement was inflated by over 200%, and we have a linear inflation factor based on the number of servers and the number of relays in our system. However, this linearity doesn't follow through forever, of course, and this is due to so-called co-measurements. So if we remind ourselves that the bandwidth authority might measure a relay in our cluster, it can happen that a second bandwidth authority also measures a relay in this cluster. This co-measurement will reduce or has an effect on our MirageFlow attack in this case. And so we explored this inflation factor based on real Tor data, which is openly available for analysis. We performed here a theoretical analysis based on historical data of Tor, and we can see here the cluster of number of relays put together and the probability if they are measured one time in this cluster, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and 5 times, of course. We can see here in the end that these co-measurements rarely occur for a cluster up to around 120 relays. Now, if you flip the question and ask what is needed to control 50% of Tor, of course, this is a theoretical question. We looked at it based on our inflation factor. So if we use the previous historical data, we can see that we have a factor of 92x to inflate with a cluster of 120 relays. This means in a real-world scenario, you would need to have 10 dedicated servers running 109 relays each for 50% of Tor's traffic. Now, the other contribution we have is the resilience of other bandwidth scanning techniques, measurement techniques. But first, this counts as a countermeasure, and I want to go through other countermeasures against this attack. So one countermeasure would be to actively probe relays, meaning we force co-measurements on specific relays. However, this is impractical since we have 7,000 relays, and it would increase the load on the Tor network itself. But we could use a detection based on historical data. So as seen before, we used the historical data to check if co-measurements happen. The same analysis can help to identify potential malicious relays in this case. However, this approach is limited, as for the historical data, there is only the end times for the bandwidth measurement involved and not the starting times of those measurements. Another possible countermeasure is eliminating explicit measurement traffic to the relays. This is the most promising approach. However, current research is impractical and is not yet deployed in Tor. And lastly, one can obscure the measurement traffic by, for example, hiding the IP of the bandwidth authority. And I want to concentrate on this point. Here we used the measurement technique of a 3-hop measurement. So if you remember, first the bandwidth authority used 2 hops to measure the bandwidth, and in this case the bandwidth would be measured by a 3-hop measurement. We do this traffic detection in this case with machine learning, and for that we of course need data. And we collected, similar as the previous speaker, our own data from the real Tor network, combined for measurement and client traffic, combined them in a data set and pre-processed them by excluding timings and IPs and such. For the detection itself, we focused on a 5-packet window. Each of those packets are then classified by a neural network, and the results of those classification is combined by a state vector machine into the actual differentiation between client traffic and measurement traffic. Our evaluation shows that still in this scenario, measurement traffic can easily be detected. We achieved F1 scores of over 99%. And most importantly, our inference time is under 0.5 milliseconds. This will allow us to run it in a real environment. And lastly, we analyzed historic data of Tor, and there we found that some relay families might be suspicious looking. Here we have the example of the relay on family that consists of 256 relay nodes. However, many offer the same or similar bandwidth capacity and have similar up and down times, indicating a co-residency of the relays. And they were deployed and put down shortly afterwards. However, they always changed the name. This malicious behavior may indicate that they use our attack vector in real world. So to conclude, we proposed a new bandwidth inflation technique, and we combine this attack with previously known bandwidth inflation methods. We have shown in the slide before that this data of the real network suggests that it's used in the wild. We've shown that the countermeasures are rather limited and not very practical, and that more resilient bandwidth measurements are needed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your talk. Micah Shore from Georgetown University. Could you say a little bit more in your 3-hop detection technique? Did you do any feature analysis or information gain analysis to figure out what features were actually being learned? In other words, when you were able to discover the bandwidth authorities, using
I just go
using
back
an
here. I
SVM.
hope that's okay.
Yeah.
You mean this picture?
Yeah. What was it? Was it the fact that the SBWS uses like fixed file sizes? Was it the fact that it's just like one GET request from a web server and not miles? I was wondering, like, can that be fixed? Can we just take SBWS and make it more realistic and so that it blends in better with other Tor traffic? Or is there something fundamental about SBWS that makes it just stand out?
It downloads files. It's very untypical for a normal flow, so you have a rather burst in bandwidth at that moment, which is generally easily detected. Now for this one, this SACNN, the models we are using is actually from related work, and they explicitly reduce the information of the packets exposed to the network. For example, like the payload is completely gone because it's anyway encrypted, but also within the TCP headers there might be timings and IP addresses that are also stripped in this case.
Rob Jansen from the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory. Mm-hmm. Thanks for your work. I've written several papers on this topic, and one of the challenges I run into is the Tor project doesn't have enough capacity to actually deploy mitigations. So I'm wondering if you have told the Tor project about your findings and what their response was, if you did.
In the initial phase, we contacted the Tor. I think you were even answered to that.
I don't mean part of the safety board. I mean like a vulnerability disclosure type thing. Like, did you tell them after you did your research, we have this attack, this is a problem in the network? Or did you recommend like any mitigations that they could actually deploy?
We recommend deployment mitigations in our paper, and we will gladly forward it to Tor network.
So did I understand correctly that you did not disclose this to Tor afterwards? And
yes, we disclosed it before, like we wrote the paper. And we asked him to do the attack on the...
I know, but I think that the question is, once you did the work, you found the attack, you demonstrated the attack, and you are proposing some countermeasures, did you go back to them? That was your question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
They say they know it all. It's not you.
maybe so everybody.
The answer of Tor was that they know it all, and they don't find any new attack here. So we disclose the details. They say they know this inflation is possible, so that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, so in that case, let's thank the speaker again and move on to the next one.